Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Standing Committee of Council on Strategies and Public Policies. As you know, this is a meeting, an information meeting tonight. It's a special one. It's rather full of information with the presentation of the budget, the municipal budget, that is. And this will be done by our staff. It will allow for an exchange between the councils, the staff, to establish the direction for the budget and the recommendation to follow. Without any further delay, I would invite Mr. Theriault, our money man, financial advisor, to come forward. Good evening. It's not working. Good evening, Your Worship, members of council, work colleague, and the public who are listening to us. Yes, tonight we're at the third steps in the presentation of the budget. If you recall, on October the 15th, on Monday, that's when it started with external presentation. We talk about Transaqua, RCMP, Expansion Dieppe, and Kodiak Transpo, among others. And on October the 22nd, we presented a capital budget that followed with some presentation by our colleagues, the one on asphalt and the asset presentation. Tonight, we are here for the general operation budget. Followed, and within the presentation, I will present the overview of what we should have in reserve between now and the end of the year, as well operation as capital. And then I will continue by presenting the 5-year plan from 2019 to 2023. 3 presentations will follow. A request for subsidy by the recreation, renovation, repair of building, and the energy efficiency of FC. That's a program they will recommend to you, and it has to do IGA energy building, and it's in cooperation with IGM. And then I'll present the water and sewerage budget. Similarly, there'll be part on reserve and the 5-year plan also for the water and sewerage to come on December the 10th for you to authorize the budget as a whole. There. The budget 2019 general operation budget. Here we see an increase of 4%. Frankly, we did not expect to have such a high figure. Our forecast, if we go back last year at this date, it was the forecast was 1.5, and there came a 1 cent increase. Following this, we need so much 2% of revenue to fulfill the debt with our expenses to balance the two, and with the 1.5 that I had plan and the 1 cent increase in tax, we talk about 2.1%. But here we have a 4%, so I'm almost 2% over and above what we were planning, which make it such. We'll take the opportunity to transfer that money in reserve, and I'll explain as I go along in my presentation. So, as you can guess, the tax remained the same as last year. That's what we're proposing. So $1.6295 per $100 of assessment, and the subsidy, the transfer, which is called the conditional grant, is 0.6%. That essentially is the increase from last year of the tax base. As a fund for 56.4 million budget, there's 51.4 that are tax, property tax, represent 11% of the total budget, followed by the equity, which is 1 million transfer rate, and the other revenues are $4 million. In the other revenues of $4 million, what do we find? Well, here is $500,000 that's surplus from 2017. If you remember, when we had a surplus 2 years before, we bring it 2 years later. Here we talk about 2017, they're transferred to 2019, and according to our financial plan that was presented last year, the surplus are not used to finance the budget. That is to say, we take it, we transfer directly in a reserve immediately. Other revenues, we talk about 2.7 million. That is included in the 4 million that are the fiscal revenue, that are revenues from arena, the renting, aquatic center, and the transfer. And there's a $750,000 that comes from the general operation budget. I'll explain this one during my presentation later, but that $750,000 will be used to finance a few things that we have in 2019. Punctual being an expense that happens only once. I'll talk more during the presentation about this one. On the site expense. Here we're at we present the evolution of the budget 2018 to 2019. How do we come from 54.1 from last year to the 56.4 for this year, 2019? The budget of 2018 had within its budget the transfer of the reserve from 2018. As I explained earlier, 2 years earlier, in 2016, there was a surplus. It was 600,000. That 600,000 was transferred to the reserve. Within the 4.1 million, there's 600,000. And I tell you this, but I have a slide that explains everything, so I won't go into any details at this time. You will see what the 1.4 is all about later on. Same thing for the punctual in 2018. These are expenses, as I said, that happens only once. We remove them from the budget to come to a basic budget of 52 million. So the basic budget with the services we have today that we offer to the population. Afterwards, we arrive at 56.4. We have transferred to the transfer of 1.4 million. I'll explain this in the following slides. Punctual of 2019, we talk about 1.7 million and new expenses, but these compared to the punctual will come back year after year after year. And you have the existing expenses of 2018 at 1.1. An example, salaries, wages, but that increase with the costs of living. And I'll have more details later on. So if we start with the transfer reserve, in 2018 we had for 1.4 million, 600,000 a surplus of 2016 that was used in 2018 to finance the capital expense in 2018. So it reduces the loan. 800,000 that was the surplus budgeted in 2018. So the budget of 2018, half was used to finance the capital expense of 2018, and the other half will be used for the financing of the community complex. At the end of 2018, that's what you will see on December 10th. I will propose that we take that amount of money, more precisely 384,000, we'll transfer it to the capital reserve in order to use to finance the complex. For 2019, it's 1.4 million also. The surplus from 2017 was $500,000. Half was used for the financing of projects, or will be used, I should say, for the financing of the capital budget for 2019. The other half will be used, like the amount that I mentioned earlier. It's another amount that was identified to serve to finance the community complex. The 900,000 that follows, as I explained earlier, instead of having a tax base of 1.5% and they give 2.1, we come to 4%. We have 2% additional that we did not plan for. That too created the 900,000 that we sent in reserve, and that put reserve to be determined, because we'll come back to you at the beginning of the year with what we intend to do with that amount of money, and then we'll have a conversation with you at that time, early next year. As for the punctual expenses that come once and never come back, I divided in two. One part will be able to be financed with the money in reserve, I'll explain later, and the other part is taken from the budget. The next expenses here are taken from the reserve. The money at the end of 2018 will be in reserve, and we'll use it in 2019 to finance these items, the following items. The first one is $390,000 for major repair swimming pool. We have a budget of $320,000 per year for building repair. When that is not used as a whole, we take part of it, we set it in reserve. Over the years, we're able to build a reserve of $390,000, and then we will use it completely for a major item, that is the repair of the pool. There is a $320,000 that we'll use for actual repair of other building, and I'll have Mr. Rimikomo make a presentation as to what he will do with these amounts of money, and he will give you an idea for future years as to what is coming as far as repair to the buildings. As I explained earlier, and the participative budget, where we're year 3 of 3, it's $70,000 committed each year. On the first year, we did not use that money at all. We put it in reserve. Year 2, there was, in 2018, we used a little part of it, and we proposed to reserve $55,000. 2 plus 1 give us $125,000, and on the third year, we'll use it to finance the project that we chose in participative budget. And over and above the $70,000, that will give about $195,000 or $200,000. There is $100,000 that will be. I talked about the past, but it's on December the 10th. You will authorize everything. So $100,000 that we propose to be transferred to repair the Amiro Akido Highway. It's a micro surface. There's about 80,000 that was used, or 75,000, I'm not sure, but around that figure that was used to fix the boulevard. We did not do any micro surfacing at all in 2018, and 80,000 was used to repair the Dieppe boulevard. You pass that in a resolution. There's 100,000 left. That 100,000 is put in reserve, finally, to repair the Amiro Boulevard. Mrs. Spencer can explain this if you so wish. There's 70,000 Duaro building. That's a new item next year. The Duaro building should be completed. Enough to allow the program to start, but that has to come with publicity. Signal. We take the money inside our budget to put it as, in a reserve to use it in 2019. There's 43,000 on survey project. That 43,000 was also identified last year and was supposed to be adopted in 2018. It won't be done. We use it, and we'll use it in 2019 for that project as a purchase of 2 electrical vehicles. 2 electric vehicles, and the 33,000 for the embellishing of August the 15th. In 2019, we'll receive the Acadian Congress, so the municipality will beautify, improve for the festivities of August the 15th. Sorry. I'm talking about another item that I will talk later. Let's come back. The Beautification of August the 15th is to make the city more beautiful. But in 2019, we were able to put some in reserve to use it for 2019 because of the Acadian Congress. If the members of council they have any question as we go along, maybe you can interrupt and ask them as we go along. Ask the right to speak, and that's how we'll proceed. Mr. Godet just lit up. I thought we were waiting at the end. Thank you, Your Worship. Well, at the end, maybe I'm curious to know more on the 4%. Let's say that we had planned 1% for this year, and now we're at 4%. It's a lot. It's $6 million compared to last year. And we'll go further in more details with future years. But we come back to 1% for next year. And I would like to know, are these forecasts compared to what happened this year? It's difficult to pass judgment on what is coming when we have such a large change as this year. There are several factors. The 1.37 we had last year, that one we were not planning for it so early. We had the freeze of the property tax evaluation were too high. There are factors that we can't plan. But I would tell you the 4%, if we talk about the 4% per se, there's several projects that received building permit in 2017, but we only see the benefits in 2019. Among others, the Sunset, for instance, the apartment block, that one is a big piece that will help us. The Boulevard Dieppe, the Canyon also, there are apartment blocks that have grown, have seen an increase. There's also commercial. We met the property tax people last week, and that's where we got the details as to what the 4% was all about. We meet them a week or so before the results come out, and they'll be coming out very shortly. But to forecast the future, we can only go but with building permit. We have $50 million in building permit that have been allowed for so far. Of these, $30 million is TD Bank. The positive side of it is that TD Bank, there was a devaluation because apparently it was Sears. They destroyed it, they rebuilt it, so the new owners have told us that the value came back to what it was in the past. We should expect to receive a good $10 to $15 million more than what the assessment was in 2018. That is positive. But do we benefit by the freeze there was? Well, the freeze, it ended in 2019, so possibly there's some of it that will result in the 4%. Thank you. Continue. The second part of punctual expenses, those that we finance from the budget, from the operating budget, $250,000 with the Francophonie Games. While according to the resolution that was adopted 2 years ago, if I remember well, at that time the agreement, and I think it's not signed yet, which I should not say agreement. The expectation is that we should pay $250,000 per year for 3 years, 2019 being the first year. That first piece of $250,000 comes to hit the budget of 2019. But as you will see, when I present the reserve, number 2 and 3 payments, you've already put in reserve, so it should not affect us. With the operating budget of 20 and 21. But there is $189,000 that was identified for the financing also towards the complex. These are 3 amounts that were suggested. I say 3 because I mentioned 2 earlier. This is the third one that was suggested towards the financing of the complex that was somewhat higher. We went from 29 million to 31.6 million. In the complex, there's $64,000 in an energy efficiency project. I won't say more. You'll have a presentation by Mr. Alexandre Girard later on. And the expenses with the RCMP building. I talk about the budget, the expenses that are non-capitalized, legal fees, legal costs. We will be asked to pay as we go along these expenses until the building is completed, if I may say so. And there are expenses with the RFP, the request for proposal. There's $40,000 for the Duaro building. We talk about the purchase of furniture, but this is a new expenses. Yes, but it will be financed, and this is why I put it's a budgetary transfer. And I come back to the story that I started, and I got mixed up in it. Our budget for August the 15th is about $70,000 next year, since it's the 2019 Acadian Congress, and it will be from the budget, the southeast part of the 2019 convention. Instead of spending $70,000, we'll spend $30,000. So there's $40,000 that is set aside to transfer for the purchase of furniture in Duaro House, and next year the budget will come back to $70,000 for the August the 15th. There's $30,000 for the hiring of a consultant and the up-to-date of information technique. The guideline for TTE, the hiring of a consultant for a few months to bring back all our systems to date, not talk about all the laptops that must be changed in the city. So he could talk more than I can, but it's to update it. If not at the end of 2019, if I remember well, they will be out of date. There's a pilot project for bus that we talked about at the last meeting, $20,000 from Lakeburn. There's the hiring of a consultant for the strategic plan. It's almost ended, so we have to start over again. And $10,000 for the consultation on the trademark for the city. So before I change the slide, any questions on this part of Councilor Thibodeau? Thank you, Your Worship. We put $20,000 for a pilot project in a bus in Lakeburn. But when we talked about it, we had said there was a possibility of using it for 13 more weeks if need be. I was wondering why we didn't put 40,000 instead of 20,000. If we don't use it, we don't use it. If we don't have it in the budget, we can't use it. I think that Mr. Richard has an answer on that. Stefan and I had a discussion about that. If it's the wish of the council is to go ahead with 26 weeks instead of 13 weeks, we think that the 20,000 may be included inside the budget that we have, because in the cardiac transport budget, some amounts are variable as to the gas and things we don't always control. And for the last 3 years, we've had a small return in around $15,000 to $40,000. So it's something we can do. If the council want to change it in the budget, we think we could try it with the budget and see what happens. Last year, I think it was to add to the budget, but I leave it to the council to decide. In answer to that, Councilor Thibodeau, I found out today that the budget with the RCMP should be reduced by $25,000. I was going to say it later on, so it could be a switch. We could transfer that amount. There would be no problem to transfer from the RCMP to cardiac transport. I want to make sure that we have the funds if we decide to include an increase by 13 weeks. Thank you. Okay, go on. Continue. Now, we're at the new expenses for 2019. We talk about expenses that will repeat over the next few years. There was a difference, $65,000 in the maintenance of computer software, as we call software. It brings a load of operational expenses as to the number of users. So it increases the budget somewhat. And secondly, after having checked with the IT director, he told me that some software was divided. I take the example of finance software is divided, one general, one water, and one storage. Well, it's quite a large amount for finance software, with water and storage should not be 66% of the operation budget. So we brought that budget back with these amounts in the general budget to 75% and 25% in our books. So it created, if you wish, an additional expense in general, but you'll see later on that water and storage went down accordingly. There's a $75,000 in the new expenses for expansion Dieppe, the portion of immigration that you already adopted by resolution. Here we propose $50,000 for new auxiliary position for land or property. We noticed over the last few years that the arena are open earlier normally. When the employees are hired, they're hired for a certain number of weeks and then they're transferred to the arena. The fact that the arenas are open earlier, there's a lack of time for the property, for the land employees to be with the festival and everything else. So it's suggested to add 2 new positions. So we talk about 26 weeks at 40 hours per week for each position. 26. As for the signals, the traffic signals, $30,000. We have more and more lights, traffic lights. Some equipments come along, control boxes, even some cameras. We have a lot of cameras. So it is a small program that we're starting to replace these equipment that could let go anytime. $12,000 as for the tourism strategy and a new program here. It's a financial incentive that we want to initiate for new houses. If they come to us with a residential electrical fire hydrant, there'll be $1,000. And on that, if you have any question, Andre Fernet can answer these questions. Question on this slide. Mr. Cadet, thank you, Worship. The tourism strategy, is that our commitment with the Southeast Commission? No, it's another program that was undertaken a year ago, approximately. So these are additional expenses? Wow, yes. Thank you. If you want more details, Mrs. Juguet, that $12,000 is mostly for our new tourism attraction, Duaro House, so that and video for 2020. So, well, that's how it is in tourism. We have to plan 1 year ahead. We have different images for new installation, but we would do it during the summer of 2019 to have promotional video for the following year, which would be 2020. Thank you, Mr. Leblanc.
Sorry, I meant Mr. Cormier. And the other, Monsieur Leblanc, father and son. Does that include the airport in the strategy? Because the airport, and yet there's on this site, there's no information on the city of Dieppe, information exclusively on Moncton, so I'm surprised we don't have more information on the municipality of Dieppe. When people arrive at the airport, the tourist strategy that we're developing with consultants mention the airport. It's Achat Media, that's the media purchase, which is very expensive at the airport. So we'll have to check. We have a sign there that mentions Dieppe, but in relationship or to the extent of our budget. I don't know what our neighboring municipalities' budget is, but these are initiatives that we'll have to check on. Where is it the most efficient to spend money for tourism? It's part of the whole strategy, but to say specifically where, we're not there yet. I find it difficult to believe that a municipality would spend a couple of $1,000s to have that much information at the airport if it doesn't bring in something that's positive. So maybe we should look into the possibility of having a more promotional material for the city of Dieppe. Well, we'll talk about costs as to how much it could cost to be more visible at the airport. So we'll discuss it. Thank you. Anything else? So we continue. So to continue with new expenses, 200,000, 35,000 for the programs at Maison Doiron. There's also 32,000 with events and $12,000. These are new figures, additional expenses. Afterwards, there were some. We had also some savings and $12,000 with community organizations. The last items that I mentioned, Madame Doiron will make a presentation later on, so I won't go into detail now. Yeah. Not Madame Doiron, Madame Cormier. Strike one? Yeah, we have to concentrate on figures, not titles or names. It's just because I see her very often with La Maison Doiron, so I'm starting to confuse her. We see $50,000 with the CMA 2019, the Congrès Mondial Canadien. It's $225,000 for the organization of the CMA. The city of Dieppe was supposed to give $25,000 every year, and this last $25,000 is going to be in 2018. That's why I'm taking it away from 2019. And then for the organization of the CMA 2019, we had set an objective of having at least $100,000 in reserves. So now we put in $25,000 a year to finally reach that $100,000 in 2018. That's going to be used in 2019. So this is where you have the $50,000 savings. There was $25,000 for rezoning advertisements. It's not necessary, so now the budget is at zero. And then $14,000 for the mobile receptors. Questions? Madame Le Boutillier. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Two questions. First, a little more details maybe on the Maison Doiron programming of $35,000, where we had set aside $70,000. What's the difference between the two? It was really for advertising, signs, promotion. So these were punctual spendings. Programming is to bring activities there. So maybe Madame Cormier will be able to give you more details. Madame Cormier. Yes, good evening. For programming, it's just for activities that the municipality wants to organize at the Maison Doiron. I know it's a little more difficult to see because you haven't visited it yet, but from the barn there are shows. We're going to invite organizations to bring forth activities there, not just the municipality, but $35,000 programming for the year, because starting 2019, there are different things that we want to do. It'll go into fall, and then there's a whole presentation in the Maison d'Oiron. Activities like cooking, meeting rooms. Do we want to organize activities? So this is for activities that the municipality is going to be holding at the Maison d'Oiron. My other question was, I didn't see it in the presentation, financial incentives. We're going to pay beforehand for a loan. Where can we find these? We have a $175,000 budget right now, year after year. This is why you don't see it, because my budgets are based on differential of expenses, therefore not on expenses, the regular expenses, but financial incentives. We have $175,000 a year. So in 2018, we didn't touch it. I'm going to suggest that you transfer it into reserves in December. Thank you. Thank you, Monsieur Leblanc. This is the real Monsieur Leblanc this time. Rezoning advertisement. You said you put the budget is at 0. Madame Duguay or Monsieur Frenette. Monsieur Frenette. Don't fight, or I can give the answer too. No, I can answer. With the previous act, planning act, we had to publish in the newspapers. With the new act, it's not a mandatory anymore. Municipalities may publish on their own websites. So there's a savings for municipalities in advertising on the website as opposed to in the papers. But we will be notifying within 100 meters of the but it's not a mandatory under the law, but it's a mandatory maybe in a different fashion. Now, the last part of the expenses, we're talking about existing or expenses, like I gave earlier, the salary as an example. There's an increase, 675,000. I would separate it in 3 parts. I'll give you a better idea of what represents this 675. 245 regular wages. Talk about all staff, unionized, non-unionized, auxiliary. That's where we get the money from. I'd also say that within this 245,000, there's a savings of 200,000. Normally, the figure should have been 445,000, but there's a savings of 200,000 for positions that were not filled afterwards. So some positions will be, I think there are 4 positions that will not be filled for next year. This is where you have the savings of $200,000. Then you have overtime, 300,000 for the firefighters here in the budget of 2018 was 550,000 for overtime. We believe that we'll end the year with a 1 million. There are a few reasons. Among them, auxiliaries here that we had firefighters were recruited, if you may, by Moncton. So that leads to overtime. That means that for next year, technically speaking, if we mention the comparative of the current with budget 2018, it's 450,000 extra. So I would propose an increase of 300,000 because there should still be a saving following the hiring of auxiliaries for firefighters. And 130,000 that has been added just recently, as you heard in the news. TSO, WorkSafe New-Brunswick, increased their premium by about 110%, 70%. We don't know what our premium is going to be. We just heard in the news that there's going to be an increase of 70,000. The impact on our operations budget is 130,000, approximately 20,000 in the water and sewer budget, but the real impact is really $180,000. The difference is that in 2018, I budgeted with a rate that was a little higher than the real rate, but now it seems that the real rate is going to be even higher than the rate at which I had budgeted. So there's a gap of 30,000, but 150,000 for the municipality. But concerning for the budget, we're talking really about 130,000 in the general operations, and then 30,000 for water and sewer. There's 155,000 for external conditions. I have a slide later on that will show all the external commissions, so I won't mention any more now. 131,000 with for capital of operations. We're talking about assets here, so we increased by 5%. The result is that there's an increase from the 131,000. So this page has changed for us. We don't have this one. Yeah, there was a slight change. The figures stayed fairly the same, except for salaries, if I'm not mistaken, or at least the order in which they appeared. Monsieur Alain. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So if we take the salaries, just the employees, the first one, the 600, the 245,000, 300 is for firefighters. Means how many employees do we have full-time? Approximately 180. So I was at the $100,000, the building replacement programs, financial plan. What the plan demonstrates is that we're going to keep 25% with assets. We can put 25% on our assets. The debt ratio is approximately 15%. The money that we put towards a capital, and when I say that, it's a little bit operations and the building replacement programs. This is capital. This is money that we're put in to pay for equipment or to replacement or for capital projects. But to maintain this 25%, and here I mentioned the last line, the debt service is going to go down by 112,000 due to the 100,000 for building replacement program. So they stayed approximately the same to maintain the ratio of 25%, the debt ratio. The question of managing the assets, if you want. So technically speaking here, because our buildings are fairly recent, but as we go, I mean, roofing has to be replaced. The outside of the house has to be changed. I mean, we started last year, and we're doing a little more this year, and we have to continue doing that same thing. $50,000 for water cost. That's the fire prevention department. They pay into the budget for water, for the use of water to, because basically they use it to put out fires. The snow removal budget increases by 27,000. I think it's 1.3 million. $30,000 also for other expenses, operations expenses, and then 112,000 is the savings for the debt service. That was a loan that we got in 2003. That was for 15 years, so 2018 was the last year. And if I remember properly, I read it. I think it was on the Gauvin. We had worked on a portion of Gauvin Street. Yeah, on the top of Gauvin. Any questions? I'm not accustomed to speaking so much. I need the water. This is another way of seeing our budget of 55.6 million. So salaries represents 29% of our budget at 16.5 million, which is an increase of 725 million compared to last year. I explained it earlier. There was 675,000 that were expenses of current wages, and then there was a 50,000 for 2 new temporary posts. External commissions, 9.7 million, 17%, an increase of 155,000. I didn't lie. The next slide is going to talk about the external commissions. Water costs, 1.6 million. It's a transfer between 2 budgets, operations to water and sewer. Capital and operations, 6.3 million, an increase of 735,000. Within this 735, there's approximately 500,000, which was for complex, the funding of the complex. The debt service goes down a little bit at 8.3 million. Like I said, it's at 14.8%. Transfer to reserves, 1.4 million, compared to a little bit of a downward trend, $10,000. And then other expenses of operations for a total of 12 million. That gives you a grand total of 56.4 million. No questions? Monsieur Godet. The other operations expenses, we'll get more detail later. For now, it's just one line. I can give you details. They can include what? Electricity, heating, snow removal. All the other expenses than the ones that were mentioned before. It's really operationals. Maintenance of buildings, yes, absolutely. Thank you. Madame Le Boutillier. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. More information, curiosity. If we take the salary of 16.5 million, it represents 29% of our total budget. Compared ratios with other municipalities, how do we compare with other municipalities? This one's always a little bit. It's not easy to answer because it's very difficult to compare to another municipality according to, depending on the services they have. If I look, for example, next door neighbor, they also have transportation service, but for us, it's an expense. There's not a portion salary for expenses that we pay for transport, whereas they will have something like that broken down as salaries. So, we can compare, but I couldn't say any more on that. Thank you. Thank you. We go on. External commissions. Like I said, 9.7 million. Police, RCMP, 5.55 million, an increase of 90,000. 2 things. First, the increase is not very much, only 90,000, though it was suggested to hire more RCMP officers because they work a little bit like municipalities. For example, the surplus of last year, if we put it back in 2 years, so go back in 2 years to 2017, there was a fairly large surplus. So in 2019, their requests or what they're asking for went down a bit, basically meaning that there's no increase now. It'll probably be next year that we will feel the increase, depending on 2018 surplus or not. Also, following the presentation in Moncton, one member of the RCMP, instead of having 5 new ones, they'll just have 4 new ones. I just received the information today that it's going to be a savings of $25,000, which goes back to the $25,000 I was mentioning for Kodiak Transpo. We'll be able to transfer between that account and the other Transpo account. Talking about Kodiak Transpo, we're talking about 1.3 million. Went down by 77,000. It's a punctual from last year that we took away. It was really a decrease, but it's really an increase, a couple of $1,000. For Expansion Dieppe, talking about also the services for immigration, increase of $100,000, 75 immigration and 75 Expansion Dieppe, for a total of 1.15 million. Solid waste, de-insectization, also 1.16 million, 152,000 for 3+ and 90,000 for the disinfectation. Grant 75,000. Capitol Theatre. It's basically the same amount that we give to the Arts and Cultural Center. So we give them 75,000, suggesting 75,000 to the Capitol Theatre, and then Ability Transport, 250,000. Questions? Monsieur Godet. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Capitol Theatre, we have no legal commitment with them, so we can change the amount. Second point, handy ability transportation. We heard last week we have a moratorium concerning new clients for ability transfer. So without new clients, some of them were on the lists that are disappearing. It was a point where the driver of the company for ability transport was saying that it wasn't viable anymore. So I'd like to know, this $50,000, $250,000, is it to redress the situation? That means that we will be eliminating the moratorium on new clients. At the next meeting of council, we will have recommendations. One is to get rid of the moratorium and to maybe make sure that the admissibility criteria are clarified. We've been assessing this for a couple of months with our service providers, particularly with the clients and for the seniors' residences in Dieppe. So we'll have recommendations. We'll present them to you, and it could mean that, well, basically for the budget, we have a $200,000 budget right now. It's been 3 years that we don't respect this budget. As a matter of fact, this year we'll probably reach 280,000, so it's a fair amount. So adding 50,000 is to help mitigate this. Recommendations, hopefully, did I say last week? I meant next week. We hope that those recommendations will help us maintain reasonable costs. So with the recommendation to get rid of the moratorium. Yes, okay. But be more serious concerning the admissibility criteria. No questions, so we continue. The slide gives you the visual concept of all the relationships between the different aspects of budgets. I started this type of thing last couple of years ago, and I said, let's see what's happening. So the 56.4 million, this is the general operating budget here. It's funded by the property taxes, 51.4 million, of 4.3 million that are other sources of funding, arena, etc. And then 700,000 from the general operating. We're talking about punctual expenses that I mentioned. On the other side, you have 1.6 million that go towards the operating budget of water and sewer. 1.4 million, the amounts that we send into reserves. For the time being, I indicated that they would go in general capital reserves because operating capital is maxed out at 2.6 million, so we can't put in any more there. And then there's a 6.3 million that go towards the general capital budget. So we have 5 million for the budget and 1.3 million for asset management. Of that amount, and I know that it's been a couple of weeks, but there's approximately 700,000 that's going to be used to purchase equipment. That means 600,000 that are going back into reserve. The 6.3 that goes in one direction, but you have 600,000 that goes towards to capital reserves at the end of 2019. So the reserve of general operating, I mentioned it, 2.7 million. It's going to be maxed out. The general capital budget should reach 8.3, maybe a little more, and I'll tell you why a little bit later. For the general capital budget, like Mr. Steves presented 3 weeks ago, it's 12.7 million. It's 12.7 million. The funding comes from a loan of 2.9 million. The other sources, 2.6 million, and a 1.5 million that comes from the general reserves and the operating capital. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the interaction between the different budgets, operating, capital, and the two reserves. No questions? We continue.
For a typical house in Dieppe, we took a house that would be sold in La Nouvelle at $185,000. So the property tax for 2019 would be over $3,015 and approximately $826 per day on a daily basis, and that's the pie of expenses, 56.8 million, 0.4 million, spread among the different services. Earlier I explained, and the famous concept of 25%, well, really, it's these two items here. When we talk about the capital and operation plus the finance of the debt, that represent 25%. As the financial service goes down, it means that the operation capital will go up, so we can do more without borrowing. And you can see the other services afterward. Do you have any questions? If not, no question. Let's go on. So, general reserve. You've heard me. I've talked about 2.7 million. The 2.7 million is the 5% of the 2017 operation budget. So, we'll max it at the end of 2018. And the main items being the snow removal. If ever, the budget for 1.3 million. If it's not enough, we can go in the reserve and take some out. The difference, also, we started a reserve for emergency measures. we have 135,000, 500,000 for the Francophony games. I explained the 2021 budget, the financial incentive as Councillor Liberty over and above the amount of the regular budget we have in 2017. What was not used, we put it in reserve. In 2018, we cannot put it in reserve because we max at 2.7 million. However, we will propose to transfer it in the capital reserve. 2.7 million being 5% of the operation budget for 2017, 2 years ago. We had 87,000 with the IT, and 741 that is punctual in 2019 that will be financed by the reserve. It's a portfolio of expenses is there in the general operation reserve. Any questions on this? No questions? Okay, go on. As for the general capital reserve, it should be at a minimum of 8.8 million in 2018. I say a minimum because there is an exercise to be done that has not been done yet. It will be done before the next time I see you on December the 10th. Earlier, I mentioned that the operation capital, we would transfer 500,000 to finance the capital project for 2019. Same thing in 2018. We had approximately 4.4 million available now. We have to go through the exercise. Were these monies spent in 2018? If not, we transfer them in reserve to use them in 2019. So it's an exercise that has to be done every year. On December the 10th, I'll come to you with other transfers that I have not identified here because we did not do the exercise. We try to do it as late as possible to be as precise as possible, but the 8.8 million includes 2.5 million for the asset replacement program. Either it's on wheel, meaning vehicles, and also equipments, buildings. We have 2.5 million on that. We have 2.7 million for the time being for the community complex, but other amounts will be added to it that we'll receive in 2019, so we'll transfer at the end of 2019 that will increase the 2.7 million that I just mentioned to 1.3 million for the projects now or future, and 500,000 that were identified to finance capital projects for 2019, and we have 1.8 million that is to be determined. There's 500,000 that I said I would transfer in capital reserve. So we'll come back with that amount in due time. Question, Councillor Gadet. Thank you, Your Worship. Do we have an indication at this time what could be the surplus if there is at the end of the year? What? Yes. Well, that is to say, for 2018, the surplus, we try to be as close to zero as possible, and we transfer it as we go along in reserve. As an example, the 175,000 that I mentioned earlier, no, I'm talking in relation to the budget, because to make a surplus disappear, all we have to do is spend. But are we in position to have an indication of what the surplus would be if we don't spend everything? He started answering and you interrupted him. He was going in another direction. No. Technically, the 175,000 would be a surplus, but I transferred it in reserve. Yes, it's part of the answer, 175,000, but as much as we think of having 200,000 in surplus, we have in budget, same thing. I intend to transfer it in capital reserve. All in all, there's about $50,000. But the main two things, these two big things, the $200,000 in salary and the $175,000 financial incentive, will not be touched, and that's the surplus, $375,000. I intend to have it transferred in capital reserve to come to as close to zero as possible. Well, thank you is the answer. Councillor Ada, thank you, Your Worship. Therefore, the budget 2019 increased by 4%. From that, we have 725,000 that is targeted for salary. Yes. What I'd like to see are comparative figures with previous years. It gives us a better overview of, well, it's to see what our property tax increased by 4%, but when I see the expenses increased by 4% also, it makes me nervous. I would like to have a better overview. Before the next meeting, I'd like to have a comparative table or chart for the last 5 years to compare. Thank you. Madame Boudier, thank you, Your Worship. Two questions. Reserve. How long have we started putting money in a reserve for good management purpose? Well, we are more aggressive now with asset management. Well, number one, we want the reserve to increase. We're a municipality that is quite young, but we know that there will be replacement of assets that are coming between 2020 and 2030, especially in 2030. So we are in a good situation today to be able to go in that direction. But also with the financial plan that was adopted last year, we put an emphasis on, number one, reserve. The surplus previously, we were using them to finance expenses for the year. 2 years later, we put them in reserve towards the asset management. Well, it's been a good 5-6 years that we've been more aggressive, but we were doing it in the past. But in other words, the unconditional grant that was $1 million, we used that one for asset management, and it ended up it's going towards management, towards reserve. Second question. The present project and future 1.2 million, and you have 1.8 million to be determined. Over the years that are forthcoming with reserve, there's certainly a maximum that we will accumulate in reserve. Is there a thought also, once we've maxed out the reserve, to put it on the debt? Each year, I would say, there's always a means of paying the debt directly. In the past, when we made a loan, we would make a loan over 15 years. We had it over 10. We had to refinance for 5 years. When we refinanced, we had the opportunity of reimbursing the debt, but we borrow every year. We can't reimburse a debt knowing that we have to borrow again. But I would say in the first few years I was here, between 2009, we took the advantage of making $500,000 refinance at that time. There was no money to reimburse the debt, but that's when the debt comes to be renewed. That's the time, and it's coming up in 2019. This is the first year that we didn't have a refinancing in 5 years in a row. First year. It's always an opportunity, and yes, we think about it, but as I said, to refinance a debt or to make another one comes to the same thing. If we pay one, we'll borrow more, so it comes to the same thing. In the present complex, the borrowing rates are relatively low. I think that if I understood what the staff is trying to do, is to displace the highest number in the operation capital so that we don't have to worry too much about the the loans that would be forthcoming, if I can put it that way, and to cause us to see the percentage of the debt increase. So I think there is a big focus to reduce the percentage of debt, and it's wise and prudent and cautious. But when we look, in my opinion, as mayor, when we compare or console ourselves, and I see the amount that we're putting on the operation capital, especially in the asset management. It's been 6, 7, 8 years that we've been working hard on it. That's where we'll make long-term gains. As Mr. Terrio mentioned, we are a very young municipality compared to our neighbors. So we don't have big capital deficits as such. That I think that the program that we are presently following is very wise, and it put us in a good position as a municipality. This is the opinion of the mayor. And financially speaking, well, we max out our loans at 1.5 million per year. Already, it's a discipline as far as we're concerned. Let's go on. Now, lastly, the 5-year plan, 2019 to 2023, 5-year plan. Our 5-year plan will group the following items together. We have community complex that is coming in the fall of 2020. We have that expense for a 5-year plan, and for years to follow, it goes without saying. The new RCMP building in 2022, the Francophonie Games. Even though the Francophonie Games, because we have the next 2 payments in the reserve, it should not affect us too much in the 5-year plan. But a big piece is that there's no major loan that disappeared before 2021. They were done in 2006 at the Aquatic Center, the Boulevard Dieppe, and the place 1604. So it will start reducing starting in 2021. Then we'll be able to put more on the asset management program. And there's also the plan that I will present to you does not reflect, or I should say, there's no increase that is related to the service that we have for public transport. I know that you will have a presentation in the near future where the opportunity or new services for public transport. But these opportunities could cost us between 0, it could go up to 4 cents increase on what I will present to you immediately, forthwith. So a general fund, the increase of the tax rate, it's 4%. Then the staff from property tax have told us for future years the base is 1%. That's what we can depend as a hypothesis we should have for future years. That is shown here, 1.5 and then 1% afterwards. Of course, as we have new developments, it could have a positive impact on that figure. Of course, obviously, the increase of property tax compared to last year, where I was planning 1 cent per year, but it was also with a property tax lower than 4%. And here for the next 3 years, we hope to be able to put the actual rate and increase 1 year next year and 1 cent after. And in 2022, with the RCMP building, it's $800,000 more that we'll pay in the future that we're not paying for today. $800,000 for RCMP building. So we can see the evolution for the operation from 56 million to 58 million for the loans, as we mentioned earlier. No capital that was presented a few weeks ago. 12, 18, 10 million for the next 5 years. And then the loan, we keep it at what is our financial plan recommends to be at 1.5 million per year, or an average over 3 years of 3.4 million. So if we have 2.9 million in 2019, the total for the next 5 years would be 4.5 million. To come to that, we must be very disciplined, as His Worship said, which means that some projects we would like to have them, but we just don't have the resources, and we have to keep them, push them aside for future years. But it's the last line where we see that it will bring some fruits. The debt level will reduce, and we have from 15% to 12.6% in 2023, and it will continue until 10% 5 years later, around 2028, that we plan to reach 10%. Mr. LeBlanc, question. Thank you, Worship. My own curiosity, if I may, the new RCMP building, are we preparing beforehand that we know the money we'll have in reserve? Are we planning to put money aside? Last year or the year before, we had already started increasing the tax base with that in mind, so that the rate will not fluctuate too much too fast. If I said the RCMP building, we talk about 800,000, 800 is close to 3 cents. Then we'll have, in these years, we'll have a complex that is another 3 cents. So it's close to 6 cents of new elements that we don't have today. We'll have in the future. But I'm asking only 1 cent increase. So we've succeeded over previous years to have a financial basis solid enough to allow us to have these things without bringing too much of an increase in the rate. So you're favoring an increase. We're preparing ourselves. What I'm saying, if the fiscal rate for 2022 we only have 1%, it's the if the financial rate is maybe there won't be any increase. It's the total of the two elements that you see here that will, if the financial rate is not enough to increase the tax, but if the financial rate is higher, good chance of not having to increase, depending on the discipline that we have. Thank you. I'll let Mr. Ayla go first. Mr. Ayla, go ahead. Thank you, Your Worship. I went through to Minister of Finance. Revenue, we never know. Expenses, we can always work on them. And Stefan, you say there will be a reduction in the operation budget 2019 to 2020. That's two things. We sent 1.4 million in reserve for 2019. That is not the case in 2020, because the reserve, or the amount that we will transfer in reserve, will be the surplus from 2018 at that time. And let's say that 2018, as I explained earlier, I tried to have it as close as possible to zero. So it was 1.4 million less that we would spend in 2020 compared to 2019. So. Thank you. If there's no other questions, I'll make my final speech. I think that when we see the 4% increase that we had this year, we have to think, yes, there was a freeze. But even if we look over the last 2 years and we add the progress on our tax base, we're very cautious with 1.5 and 1% for future years. When we think about the projects that's already on the table for the community, all of that to say that the responsibility of the council is to create an environment that is favorable for the investment that will continue to encourage our investors, our developers to want to develop here. That is a responsibility of the council, okay? Next page. Your worship, that's the end of my presentation for the time being. I will come back at the end of the evening with the water and sewerage budget. I will leave it to Mrs. Cormier. Question, Mr. Chima. Yes, a question for Stefan. 1% of increase in tax rate represents how many cents? 1% is 450,000. 1 cent is 300,000. So, is that helpful? Thank you. Good evening once again, Your Worship. Members of Council, I will present the subsidies for the year 2019. We've wanted, because usually we come with community organization, we wanted to include events. That's a partnership subsidies. We wanted to add them to the presentation. So we'll start. The budget 2019 for subsidies or a community organization, the one that we bring in January to have adopted for 2019, we plan $296,700. I'll go by policy steps for our organization. Subsidy has to go within one of our policy. Municipal policy, so we'll go one by one. If you have any question, we'll follow these policies. The first agreement, our agreement that we have with the council, with the city, if you wish, these are agreements that don't go within our policies. Association are not included. In the policy, we have the Atlantic Ballet. The year 2019 will be the fourth of 10 years for $10,000. So we will give a grant of $20,000. Evolution campaign for University of Moncton 3 years ago in 2019 will be the third 5 years for $50,000. We also have the campaign for the safeguard of a cathedral for $10,000. Games of Acadie, the organization of games, 3 out of 5 years, $5,000. And our last year with the Research Institute of Cancer, 5 of 5 years, $10,000 in 2019. Also, for the agreement that costs $95,000, we recommend in 2019 for the campaign extraordinary that came to make a presentation in the last few weeks for the Moncton Hospital, the year 20 to 23, that would be $50,000 that we would recommend for $12,500 a year for 4 years for the Moncton Hospital. Since we removed the Cancer Research Institute, that would be removed from it. The next, the Policy L13. The Policy L13, a partnership that we have with the association sector. The first one is the Santa Claus Parade, a contribution of $2,000 to help the organization of the parade. It's this weekend. We also have St. Awesome Church, the parking that is across from the church on the other side of the house for $2,500 for the parking that we use for citizens that want to go on the trail in the winter. The cleaning, we help with the cleaning and the snow removal and with that piece of parking. Policy on down 13, there's for $4,500. According to Policy L15, these are subsidies we give to our community groups, either they're within our installation or they rent our installation. The first one is Army Cadet, $4,500. Golden Age Club of Dieppe for its program, $2,000. We have the Golden Age of St. Awesome, which was for the program, $2,000. Boys and Girls Club, $50,000. And the Rhythmic Extenso Gym, we don't have a gym. We give a contribution of $14,000, a maximum, for the rental of a room. And the youth house that we give a contribution of $54,000. We also have money for community intervention for the employee salary and others, $46,000. The office is in the youth building, pro youth promotion. We give them $3,700. The Dieppe Scout, we help them with the building. At the Rotary Club for $6,000, and we have the military veteran. We offer $2,500. That gives a total of $180,650. That policy of 15, I must tell you, it was not changed since 2016. So we will make a revision in 2019. All the other policies were amended, but this one was never dealt with. So we have the policy L19, that is the financial support that we give to youth, a youth group that goes on a provincial competition, national or international. We also have the cultural aspect, where earlier it was sports, but now culture is making progress, and we have evaluation for requests for $7,500. The policy L20 are donation that we give. The food bank, Second Chance, that is the food bank in Dieppe, for $2,000. Crime rate, Heredito, $2,000, and AIDS for $1,500, and volunteer via CMP for the three communities. We give $2,800. That gives a total amount of $9,050. So that includes all the requests that we have. The whole total is in there. Do you have any questions before we go any further? Question, Councillor Gadet. Thank you, Your Worship. Last year, maybe the year before, a group of theater approached us to know if they could settle in Dieppe, and it did not happen. It's already been a year and a half, but in January, I was called by the manager, the city manager, who said there would be a new policy for groups that are starting, new groups, and it would be punctual subsidies for these groups. I would like to know, were these policies developed, and if so, can I have a copy? No, the policy was not developed this year. We met with the group that you're talking about, and we continued with the Art and Culture Center. They wanted to include it in their budget, and it never went anywhere. So we were supposed to come and see us in March. They never came back. So you did not develop that policy? No, we did not. But it's something we could look at for sure. Well, it's been a year and a half that the request, there's been exchange of letters and everything. The request was done to the city. As councillor, I told them there would be a new policy that was coming out for a new startup. Because by talking to Art and Culture, they don't have the means to subsidy that kind of thing. So for a startup, so they'll ask real money according to their cost. Maybe that's the reason why nothing was done so far. It's a theater drama group comprised of immigrants. They've been doing drama for 2 years, and they're settled here and there in the city. So I wish we would come back with that policy, at least to give them a chance to make an application, because at the present time, they fit nowhere. Thank you very much.
Monsieur Alain. Thank you very much. Extenso rhythmic gymnastics. What was that? Say? Where are they? Did they use the establishments here in the municipality? Yeah, they're at Anna Malenfant and at Sainte Thérèse School. So we give them 40%, as we do with our youth groups. Community outreach, yes, it's a youth house. I have children who go to Mathieu Martin, and they talk about the center. Is it possible to have information on the programming in the intervention center? I know they do good work. I'd like to know a little more about it. Sure, I'll get it to you. Is that it? Madame Marcelot. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Madame Cormier. Under Policy L15, the Saint-Anselme Seniors Programming, $1,000. Does that seniors club still exist? Yes, up to this year, they still had meetings and organized activities at Rotary in Dieppe. So the $2,000, the remainder of 2018 goes into their, yeah, it was for their programming. But we have an agreement with them, and it's finished now, so they won't have it anymore. Thank you for the information. Monsieur Thibaudot, thank you. I noticed that nowhere is there any money for La Maison de Zanaret. These days, specifically, there's a great need, so I'm wondering, do they put in a request where they refuse, or what? I have to look into it. In 2018, we had said that the 2018 would be their last grant, and then Maison Nazareth, that was finished, so we took it out of the budget. But I know that there's a social aspect in the municipality to give funds to our homeless, so that's something that we'll think about once again for Maison Nazareth for 2019. Last year also, when we worked on the budget, we'd asked to have the list of people who had requested funds and whom refused. I could get that to you. I could get that to you for 2018, 2019, no problems. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any other questions? I think, as it has already been mentioned, the youth house should be on a list of agencies that we sponsor. Maybe they should come and make a presentation here. I mean, there are others. We have a whole list. I think it would be important to have at least every 2 years that they can come and tell us what they're doing for the community. I think the Boys and Girls Clubs is another one. I see that Youth House now receives more money than the boy and girl schools, and I know that boys and girls schools are getting funding from elsewhere, but I think it would be important to hear from those agencies on a semi-regular basis. Something that could be included in our meetings of the third Monday of the month. I know that we're getting to the end of the year, and we'll have another one until January, but maybe starting in January, Yeah, we asked for the Arts Center, the Boys and Clubs comes. We asked them to come and make us a presentation before their year end, which is in March, 31st of March. So we continue. No other questions for the events budget, which is at $388,350. This one, we didn't want to put the amounts as such because sometimes the amounts that were negotiated with them, so don't we want them. We don't want to put them up on the slide, but I'll send it to you if you want. Further grants championships organized by our organizations, for example, baseball, tennis, $6,750, which is included in that $388,000. New events, $267,000, as our treasurer mentioned. Falco Games and also the golf tournament that's in Fox Creek starting 2019 for 3 years. And then also the balance would be the events that we have in partnership with our organizations, as the Book Fair, Falco Fête, Frishti Festival, Inspire, Afrofest, Hubcap, International Film Festival, Francophonie, Festival de la Récolte, and Northrop Frye. $114,600 for all of those. So those are our events for 2019. Questions, Honorable Boutillier? Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You'll pardon me, but in your presentation, we talk about policy L15, but has it been replaced by another policy? Because I can't find it on the site. L15 on our website? We'll have to check for L15 because it should be there because it's still current. So I was wondering, maybe is it L19? It seems to be similar. No, L15 is for support for organization for our operations budget, and 19 is for youth who go to championships. We'll have to check to make sure that it's there. No other questions? So that means that Madame Cormier's presentation is over. I think the next item is a feasibility study pilot project. Oh, no, you kind of switched them, eh? Okay. So, Monsieur Thériault. Somebody was an early date? No, it's in your presentation. Presentation 4 is gonna have it before presentation 3. So go to page 51 for Monsieur Comeau's presentation, and then you can come back to page 37 afterwards for the pilot project. It's very interesting for the chair to be aware of this before the meeting. Word to the wise. Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. So tonight I'll be presenting the building renovation program. Page 51 for members of council. First of all, the building renovation program lined up with the strategic plan. We see D1, we talk about determining the condition index of the building. Up to now, we've had the evaluation of the buildings. Condition index, what it is that we look at the value of replacement for all the buildings. We take that amount that it would cost us to fix up the building till a new standard, and we compare it, and we have an example. So if we're between 0 and 5%, we'd be at a good rate. Between 5 and 10%, it's a fair range. Above 10% is a poor range. So the municipality this year has an index of 6%. So something to be considered for the future years. Here we've evaluated buildings. We finished the evaluation in 2018. Capital Management and Engineering Limited did the evaluation, the assessment. So we assessed 19 of our buildings. The replacement value of all the buildings, the 19 buildings that we assess, is of $66.7 million. And in 2018, we had a fairly good condition index of 0.76%. So we wanted to be under 6%. So we're right now in pretty good condition concerning on buildings. According to the assessment, over the next 10 years, we'll have to invest $7.5 million in renovations in our buildings. So that would be the roofing or siding or parking, etc. $7.5 million in renovations. So if we don't put any money in at all for the next 10 years, our condition index will reach 11.25%. This is why we have the program, in order to be able to maintain our buildings. This is a projection of the condition index if we don't put any money into our buildings, no investment. In 2024, we would be at our 6%, under which we would like to remain. Right now, we're investing $320,000 a year. So here, with $320,000, it'll be possible to maintain ourselves under the 6% till 2029. Here, for information, if we increased it to $500,000 investment every year for building renovation, we'd be good till we'd be still under 6%. If you look at the blue curve, that's us. The blue-green was basically if we had energy efficiency and we reinvested the gains in the buildings. This is where we'd be at. But for the time being, ours is going to be the blue one. We don't have programs set up for anything possibly resembling the green line. Here, just to mention that right now we're putting in $320,000 a year. So if we continue to invest $320,000 a year for the renovations of building, the index would be at 5.85% in 10 years. By investing $500,000 a year, in 10 years, we would be at 3.16%. As mentioned earlier, the annual budget is $320,000. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can stop me. So for 2019, we have $710,000 in the budget. We have $390,000 in the reserve that's going to be transferred, plus the $320,000 that Michel talked about earlier. The Aquatic Center, we're talking about the layer of the sheet, the protective sheet of the pool. It's going to be the 9th year. This is there are a lot of people in the recreation pool, so it needs to be replaced. The membrane. We're going to be doing more than that. We'll be looking at the everything around it. Roofing. It's also the little wall between the roof and the wall. There's a little bit of condensation that occurred there. So we're going to find a solution to that problem next year. Operations Center. We'll be repairing the floor of the wash bay and the mechanics workshop, the floor there too. We're going to put in something so that it can last longer. There are cracks, so we're going to be filling in the concrete. We'll get cracks in the concrete, and we're going to put something to make it last longer. There'll be a new compressor for the center, the same one that we had in the old Public Works building. Had moved to that new center. It needs to be replaced. Repairs at the firehouse on Gauvin. Windows, water is infiltrating when there's a lot of wind. At the Art Center, the soffit on the outside of the building, basically work has to be done on the outside of the building. In 2020, we'll talk about it a little later in the next presentation. That's why I felt it was better to present this one first. A lot of money for the renovations of the Arthurgie Leblanc Arena. New lights, LED, on the ice surface. Repair the exterior canopy at the entrance of the building. On some poles, it needs repairs. Energy reuse initiative during the assessment of the building to save energy is basically that it's pushed outside. So the heat that is pushed outside, what we do, we'll use it to refrigerate the ice. The other items are heat pump, the heating in the stands, $32,000, and also the vestibule, the entrance, the hallways. The assessments of some buildings had been made by the firm. Initiatives to save energy. We can have incentives from NB Power. We'll be receiving a portion as a grant in the shape of initiative. It'll probably be the last year that we have access to this money, so we'll have to optimize our investments. That's why we have energy improvements in a couple of our buildings. In 2021, renovations are planned at the Dieppe market, the floor of the mezzanine on the second floor and the stairs. New lights, LED also. Arts and Cultural Center, new lights. Metal kind of roofing on the southern side. Arthurgie Leblanc Arena, looking, replacing the boards at Saint-Anselme surface. Ventilation system at the Maison des Jeunes, we talked about it earlier. It needs to be replaced. And then at the Municipal Hall, we want to replace the lights of the parking. So for 2021, we're looking at $325,000 in investments. I forgot to mention the amount in 2020, but it was similar, $315,000 approximately. It's an average of $320,000 a year. That's the end of my presentation. Questions from members of council? Madame Arsenault. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You mentioned the pool membrane was $400,000 to replace. Has it been replaced recently? 2016 or thereabouts? It had been replaced, the membrane, maybe not the membrane, it was the, there are two hallways. We replaced the floor of the hallway. That section, now it's at the entrance, there's a membrane, but all the sides to the intersection between the membrane and the floor is going to be replaced. That is what is $400,000. There's also the side, it had been replaced. It had under guarantee at one point. So it's basically really from the bottom up to the sides. We're talking about not only the membrane, but so it's to redo that section here. It's guaranteed for 10 years. Well, we're in discussion with the material providers. So, but there's no guarantee anymore. So, we're discussing with them. We're trying to get the best. We're trying to make sure that the amount is less than what's budgeted. But we're asking. We were told that the work has to be done. So we want to do it in 2019. But for guarantees, we're working on it. We're waiting for answers. Thank you. Something that has to be mentioned also, the main reason of the wearing out is the amount of people who are going to the pool. So no other questions? Thank you. So we go backward in our agenda to go with energy efficiency. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Girard, good evening, members of council. My presentation tonight is on the feasibility study at the AJL arena energy savings. So the plans and the policies of the municipality on viable things. Talk about the project, asset management. We'll talk about possible partnership with the FCM. We'll talk about the return on investment, because here we're talking about an energy efficiency project. So the municipality, as you know, adopted a few plans and policies for the promotion of sustainable development. One of its key objectives for us is the question of reducing greenhouse gases, as far as resolution in 2016 to reduce the emissions by 15% by 2025. So as you'll be able to see, the project is on that objective. So as in the past, here we're looking to establish a partnership with the FCM, Federation of Canadian Municipalities. We'll need to apply a couple of times to see if we're eligible for this grant. So we're looking at 30% minimum gains in efficiency. But in order to have access to the grant, we would have to establish feasibility to show that we would get 30% efficiency. And then it'll be the next step would be to turn it into a pilot project. I'll explain that a little bit more in detail. So at this point, the AJL arena consumes approximately, well, it costs approximately $275,000 in 2017. So what we're looking in doing here, and we're looking at reusing heat from the furnaces. Would be an opportunity here to maybe improve it with solar panels, improvement of the heating system, the water heating system, and the heating in the stands. We're talking about 30% gain. That means that we could get $82,500 a year, something that would be a reduction of approximately 560,000 kilowatts hour, which would be a reduction of greenhouse gases of 165 tons, and our goal was 269 tons equivalent CO2, but that would be representing all the buildings. So with the renovation of one building would put us in very good position in order to reach the objectives by 2025. So the total cost of the project would be $827,500, which would include the grant from the FCM. We could also get a grant from NB Power. To come back to what Remy was talking about, it was a study from Capital Management that said that in 2019, between 2019 and 2028, we'd have to have renovations of approximately $2 million. And on the question of energy efficiency of that $2 million, we would get $400,000 that would be earmarked for improvement of energy efficiency, which would mean a savings of $60,000 a year. And then once again, we could probably get another $40,000 from NB Power. So the opportunity here to better the program with an application to the FCM will give us the opportunity to get money from the federal government through their programs, the Green Municipal Fund. It would be a great opportunity to hire a consultant, the consultant, Yves Hennekens. We've worked with him before. He was also an assessor for the FCM. He also worked on the FCM assessment for the firehouse. If you remember, we'd asked for a feasibility study, solar panels, efficiency, energy efficiency. So he's really aware of the process of the FCM, and he would be able to give us a good strategic direction in your application. So it's something really good to do. So once again, the description of the different phases of the project, 4 phases. The first one would be to prepare the request for the application for the FCM for the feasibility study. It would cost $5,000. Phase 2A, if the FCM accepts the application for the feasibility study, we could probably receive up to 50% of the eligible costs for the feasibility, which would mean for us a cost of $17,500. If the feasibility shows that it's feasible, if the study shows that it's feasible, those costs would be also eligible for 50%, which would mean a cost of $100,000. We'd be admissible to 50% of those costs. Phase 3 would be for the application for the pilot project. So there would have to be a second application to the FCM with the consultant. And if we're accepted for the pilot project, then we'd have the opportunity of getting another $350,000 from the FCM for a total cost of that phase would be $700,000. So here, I just want to talk about the risks associated with the project. Obviously, when we make an application to the FCM, it's never guaranteed. So I'll show you the different steps and the different risks. First phase, we give $5,000 to the consultant to prepare the application, which is a fairly lengthy and complete program. Phase 2A, if our application is not accepted, then there would be a loss of $5,000 for the consultant, and time lost for staff. Phase 2B, the study demonstrates that it's not feasible in a reasonable time frame. We couldn't get the 30% gains in a reasonable frame. There would be a loss of $5,000 plus $8,750, which would be half of the feasibility study. Phase 3, once again, if we proceed with the application for the pilot project and the FCM refuses our application for the pilot project, then we'd have substantial losses, $78,750. If we're accepted with the feasibility study, generally speaking, they accept the pilot project. So once again, with the expertise of our expert, with the preliminary meetings that we've had, it seems that we have pretty good possibility of being accepted. So, summary, very quickly, total cost of the project for the city of Dieppe, if we receive complete funding from FCM, $10,000 expert, $8,750 for the feasibility study, $50,000 for the plans and quotes, $350,000 for the construction. Total contribution was $378,750.
And the figures that are important, the anticipated power, we have $82,500 savings since we've improved the efficiency of the building. We don't have to spend $82,500 a year for the power, the energy of the building. We would have 65-ton equivalent of CO2 that would make us close to the objective of 2025, and we would have a scenario of return on the investment of approximately 4.5%. So that completes my presentation. If you have any questions from the councillors. Thank you, Mr. Girard. Thank you very much. Madame Boutillier, the light came on. Yes, question. Normally with FCM, how much time, the time for approval, to expect that it could be a reasonable delay? How long could it take? Historically, it should be within a year. So for the feasibility study, we should have an answer in 2019. For the second application would be in 2020. So we would intend to submit our second application in 2020 and to have an answer in 2020. That would be for the second application. The first one would be in 2019, and we would receive an answer from the FCM in 2019. The cost? You evaluated. How did you evaluate the cost? So the cost, Remy can help me. Well, we did some feasibility studies, summary. Remy, can you help me? That 350,000 is the maximum we can receive from the FCM, and we have to invest half to have access to 350,000. And we talk about a project costing 700,000. That's where the feasibility study come in. We've had studies with a small study on energy. There were certain things, but not to go as far as 700,000. That's where the feasibility study allow us to confirm if, with the $700,000, we can reach 30% of energy savings. We didn't want to go higher. We had the $700,000 to allow us to get the maximum from the FCM. That would be 50%. That's where the figure comes from. Feasibility study will give us some more exact figures than what we have presently. So that's why we're still at step number one. Thank you. But with Mr. Anakin, Eve, there must have been an order of ideas, because I know he's a person who's done a lot of projects in that field. So he must have an idea of the cost. Yes, and we prepare a preliminary budget with him, and he gave us an indication that we were within reason, as considering his experience. At this time, we look at an aspect that is quite innovative, so maybe it's a little harder to have exact prices at this time. So it is the reason to go and get a feasibility study, a more detailed feasibility study, and that will either give us not to proceed with the project for whatever reason, or if it shows that the costs are not reasonable, or on the other hand, to say really to go ahead because there is an opportunity. So it will really direct us one way or the other. One thing to add, in the presentation, by the building innovation. There were amounts. It's the same amounts of 350,000. We're not talking about additional funds. I want to clarify. There's $250,000, but 300,000 in 2020 that's planned for Arthur G. Leblanc building. In the new, there's 64,000 this year. That is requested by Alexandre. But thank you. Thank you. I don't see another lights. Thank you for your Mr. No, I'm sorry. Thank you, Your Worship. I understand. It looks good. It looks good. It sounds good. But what is the final date? When can we expect to have it? Ideally, we would have an answer in 2019 for the feasibility study, and in 2020 we would make our second request application, hoping we're accepted. So in 2020 we could look at the construction or the repair. So we are optimistic. We're optimistic, aren't we? Because we received probably will get the financing. And from what I understand, financially we're solid, aren't we? And I'm very encouraged with everything I hear tonight. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. No further question? No? Okay. So water and sewage, that's all that is left. So we'll continue with the water and sewage operation for 2019. What we propose for 2019 is an increase in rate of $12. It represents 1.3% for water and sewage. We would go from $928 to $940. If we go by item, water, in 2018 is $480, an increase of $8 to come to $488. Sewage from $422, so an increase of $4. And the waterways of Greater Moncton, or Transaqua as they are known, their unit remains the same as $210. That would bring us to an increase, as I said earlier, of $12. But I'll explain it. I have a lot to say on the water and sewage, but I will continue the presentation and I'll give a little bit more details on this. As for the source of the fund, the total budget is $12.9 million. So the income in water, the rate represents $5.6 million. The sewage represents $5.2 million. So we talk about $10.8 million between the two. And the general operation fund, there's a transfer of $1.6 million that will come from the general operation fund, and the other revenue is $500,000. In the other revenues or income, there are $230,000 that come from the reserve. That is to say, punctual expense that I will present in a few minutes of $48,000 on forestry. We want to finance it, or propose to finance with the reserve instead of increasing the rate. As well as in 2017, we have known a deficit in the sewage, water and sewage together. We had a surplus of $40,000, but water realized $120,000 in surplus, but there was a deficit that came to $40,000 when we grouped the two together. And as our financial plan says, our surplus are put in reserve, but the reverse, when it's a deficit, we go and get it from the reserve to finance the deficit for the year that appear. So in 2019, presently, we have an $80,000 to pay the deficit of the storage. but I will also transfer 120,000 in reserve because of the surplus from the water. So it cancels each other. We take one, you'll see it later on, but there's a difference of 40,000 that will go in reserve at the end of it all. And the other part of the other revenues of $270,000, it comes from different items such as expansion Dieppe, for instance, one day. As to the expansion, the aviation avenue, they did some work for phase 1 3-4 years ago, so the city borrowed the money. Expansion Dieppe is refunding us, and phase 2 was also completed, but part 2A, I should say. So as to the underground, it was completed. We borrowed 600,000. 443,000 was for the water and sewage assets. So they reimburse us the loan that started in 2019. They will reimburse us. There are revenues and interests that are included. Fire hydrant, the location of the water tour. Also, that is part and parcel of the 500,000. So all of that is included in 500,000. So I think in your presentation you don't have this page. I'll come back later on as to what you see presently, but I'll jump to the following slide if I may. And here I'm talking about analysis and expense, similar as what I did with the general budget. We talk about 12.64 to 12.86 million. So in 2018, we had at that time transferred $190,000 to the reserve. The $190,000 translates with a surplus of 2 years before, 2016. Surplus there, punctual. In this case, there was 60,000 punctual last year. That is removed. It will not come back. So to come to a basic budget of 12.39 million, the punctual of this year. So we talk about $60,000. I'll have more details. Something new of $60,000 in 2019. And there's a transfer to the reserves. The surplus I just mentioned earlier of the water that was 120,000 is transferred to $10,000 more than what we have been able to get back in the change of 2019 of $120,000 salaries, among other things I included in that, and I'll explain that. So, one moment. For the punctual of $60,000 to the budget for 2019, we talk about $49,000 access road and forestry. So it was approved in resolutions. A program that we are undertaking. The first year is $49,000 expense, but as the years go by, and with the cut of wood, there will be sales, and we'll make it such we should have surplus in following years. The first year, we'll take the money from the reserves, so we don't affect the rate that time. The water and sewage rate, it will create surplus for following years, and we'll be able to transfer in the reserve at that time. And $11,000 to replace the pump at Champlain Station. As for the new expenses that will be coming back here, I intend to start a program of provision for bad debt. We have $390,000 in receivable that are due, and we've had it for many years, and of course new ones are added. But last year, especially, we call it frontage. Frontage. When the lands are subdivided at that time. So, I'm talking about the year 2005, 2006. We built the Berg Street at that time, and the way it works is that we do the work, and once we do the work, they're reimbursable 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 municipality, 1/3 on one side of the road, and 1/3 the other side of the road. In this case, we registered $210,000 of receivable, but within that $210,000, there is a length of property where the retention basin are or shed, it will not be divided. We should not have created that receivable in those years. Now we have to cancel it. It's a big amount. We talk about $90,000 here, and there's other amounts also inside the 390,000 that I said earlier that must be canceled, and it's a panoply of different small items, the 1,000, 3,000, 5,000, all small items. So what I'm proposing for the time being is to start a program of provisions that will go on for 4 years. After 4 years, I will have $180,000 in an amount, and I will be able physically to cancel, if you wish, those accounts receivable. At the time, I'll come see you, and we'll come and get a resolution to do it. So, by starting this provisions, I don't cancel anything. I recognize the expense for the next few years to create that, and then to cancel the receivable in 4 years from now. So the rates remain stable, and it does not create anything unstable. And he was proposing $20,000 for video program. In the past, we had this program. We eliminated it. We're putting it back on the table. Is to see what is the quality, if you wish, or the condition of our pipe, water and storage pipe that we have underground. So it's an important part of our assets. So we have to replace them. So it's a good management to know exactly the condition of these pipes. Any question before I turn the page? Question from the councillors? No question. Go ahead. As for the changes, that's to say, current expenses that increase or decrease for 2019. Salaries have a good reduction of $126,000. And here, same thing as I mentioned earlier. It's especially a withdrawal where the salary was 100% in water and storage, so it has greater impact in a small budget. But there's the other three position that not replaced previously, where a smaller portion of the salary that went in water and storage that caused that $126,000 reduction wise. There's also inside this $20,000 for TSNB, $20,000 for the increase in salary of actual present employees, and well, that's it, $55,000 with unionized and non-unionized. But there's the fact that there's $200,000 for non-replaced employees. It makes $126,000 for water and storage. For the next item, well, the purchase of water from the city of Moncton will be $237,000 more. That's $15,000 more than what it was last year. It's a huge increase. So we go from 53 cents cubic inch to 61 cubic meter. Each cent of increase for us is worth $3 in the water and storage rate. So that increase of $237,000 represent $24 of the water and storage rate. The explanation for that one is, as you all know, there's been a problem with the blue algae, green algae, and the city of Moncton, according to our new agreement that we have for 15 years, they are doing financial statement, and then we pay the rate later on. In 2017, for instance, when that event occurred, their accountant proposed to put $1 million, kind of a buffer or reserve. It was a kind of a buffer, if you wish, for the costs that it will represent to fix that problem that was caused in 2017. It's a provision, it's not expenses that was occurred in 2017 because of that of that activity. It's a punctual expenses of $1 million. Our portion represents close to $237,000 out of $1 million, which make it that it's punctual expenses. Next year, in 2019, already we have provisions for the next 5 or 6 years in the purchase of water. The purchase of water should be reduced to 57 cents, and then to 54 cents for, so gradually to increase again. You know, you've seen for sure when the city of Moncton had their budget study, there'll be $6 million in infrastructure that they'll have to undertake for the problem of green algae, and 21 million in 2021. Now, to explain that, how that affects us, what that is to say, if I take $6 million in 2019, next year, the expense will occur in 2019, but the borrowing will be in 2020. The refund of the loan will start in 2021. According to the agreement we have for the purchase of water with the city of Moncton, it's only in 2023 that we will pay what the city of Moncton will pay in 2021. It will only affect us in 2023. The $6 million of in capital investment in 2019, same thing for 19 million. That one will affect us in 2021, but it'll be in 2025 that it will affect us. It will happen in 2021, so it allows us to foresee those expenses and to budget accordingly, so as to have a rate that will increase constantly to come to these results without having huge increase during those years. I need water. I apologize.
Maybe we're going to take some questions too at the same time. Monsieur Leblanc. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The only agreement we have with the city of Moncton, even if we're just customers of theirs, we're not going to pay for infrastructure improvements. The agreement we have with the city of Moncton is concerning the assets that we share. In other words, to have running water, there are certain assets that are identified, and we have to pay our own share of that to the city. So in this case, because it's going to go really with the water at its beginning, we're going to be paying a portion of the improvements that are going to be done. As a municipality, do we have a return on our investment for improvements? We'll pay for the infrastructure, but we get what in return? Water? The cost is already established. It's going to go up by 53, 51. The reason from the 53 to 61, like I explained earlier, it's kind of an advance in 2017 that we have to pay in 2019, but it was related to the blue algae. The increase of the rate is a direct consequence of the repairs to the infrastructure that we share with the city of Moncton. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Thank you, Monsieur Le. Yeah, we talked about it at the three municipalities meeting, but we're going to be paying till between 25, 27 million. How do we determine our share according to the use or the amount of population? It doesn't go with the population, it with the quantity of water that we purchase and that is produced from the 3.3 million cubic meters. I don't remember the figure exactly, the production, but that's how we establish the percentage. And we're going to be paying percentage on the infrastructure that we share, that are part of the network to bring the water here. Thank you. Another question? So we continue on this lengthy page. Actually, it's not the page as long as the explanations. It's operations capital increase of $38,000 for the general operating, an increase of 5%. Debt service increase 25,000, and I explained it earlier, but it's essentially the new debt from last year, which was $493,000, which related to the infrastructure on Aviation Street, which is funded by expansion Dieppe. So we get the revenue, consequently. $25,000 for electricity, pumping stations. $20,000 for Chance Aqua. General Moncton Wastewater Commission. It's the amount of units that we figure are going to be increasing in the city of Dieppe, especially residential. And $17,000 for administrative costs, legal costs. 5% rebate residents can pay if they pay before mid-February. The entirety of their invoice, they get a 5% rebate, and okay, it happens. So obviously we have to budget in consequence. And then a reduction of $14,000 for programs, computer programs. There's a decrease in information technology. That's for that page. Are there any questions? No, we continue. So now I come back to the slide that I had forgotten earlier. 12.86 million budget. How do we break it down? Well, see, mainly salaries, 2.85 million. It's downward from 126,000 compared to last year. Water purchase, 2.08 million, increase to 237,000. Wastewater treatment, 2.46, going up $19,000. Operations capital, $38,000 increase to 1.01 million. Debt service, slight increase, $24,000 to reach 2.79 million. And then there's operations of water and waste, sewers, 1.5 million, increase $95,000. And then transfer to reserves, $12,000. $120,000, reduction $62,000. All the differences that we see, basically, I explained everything pretty well with the different previous slides. So same kind of diagram for the water and sewer budget. 12.9 million is funded by 10.8 million. Water and sewer rates. 1.6 million comes from the general operating budget. Water costs. $300,000 other sources, Expansion Dieppe, for example, like I mentioned earlier. 200,000 from the reserve. Oh, what I did not mention earlier was in the reserve we have a stabilization reserve. This gives us the capacity, gives us the opportunity to kind of smooth things out so that they maintain themselves. The water rates is going to increase by $237,000. So my suggestion is to get $100,000 in the general operating budget to finance that purchase, because next year, like I explained earlier, the water rate is going to go down by 4 or 5 cents. So that means that we'll be able to put some more in the reserve. 5% of the operating budget of 2017 is $630,000, and in 2018 you'll see that I'll be suggesting the optimization so that we avoid the fluctuations. I'm losing my voice. So that's for the 12.9 million. On the left, you have the $630,000 reserve operation, water and the sewer. On the right, 2.2 million. Against here, it's a little higher, but we'll work things out in the beginning of December. And then the capital budget, 1.4 million. No need of loans. So it's basically financed with the general operating budget and water and sewer operating budget, $200,000. Reserves. And I know it's a little different from what you have in your paper. I had to decide, and I did decide this morning, that's why you haven't received it yet. The general operating reserve was not optimized. In other words, it was approximately $430,000. In 2018, we had budgeted $180,000, which was a surplus of 2 years before that. We figured we were going to send them into capital, but there's space necessary. We have the opportunity, if we want to optimize the operating reserve instead of transferring it to capital. So I suggest to transfer it to water and sewer operating to maximize this. So that puts us a little bit in the safe corner, because this is where things could change as far as expenses are concerned. So 5%, like I explained earlier, of the water sewer budget gives us the $630,000, which you could reach this year. I think it'll be the first time that we reach optimizing the water sewer budget. Stabilization reserve, $510,000. $50,000 with the information technology system. 35 contingency and 35 uncommitted. That is basically the $630,000. General capital reserve, 2.2 million, 300,000 for asset replacement programs. 1.3 million, which basically are projects which are current or that we set aside for a later date. You'll have all these detailed lists when I give the presentation on the 17th of December. $200,000 in capital financing, which was earmarked for projects in 2019, and then $300,000, which are basically surface to be determined as far as the use is concerned. And I'll be finished. All that remains is the 5-year plan for the next 5 years. Unit rate. We foresee that it's possible to maintain it at $940 for the next 4 years. And then in 2023, where there will be capital improvements, 2019 should basically take effect. But we will need to make decisions during those years. Stabilization reserve is going to be there in order to be used as a buffer to protect us from cost increases. But there's another item, and it'll be on my last slide. It's with the commercial rates. They will increase over the next 4 years. This is why we're going to try to maintain the unit rate to compensate for the increases of the commercial rates. I'll come back to it in a minute. It'll be my conclusion. So you see the fluctuation of operating budget. That's going to go from 12.8 to 14 million. Capital projects, approximately 5 million. For borrowing, 2 million approximately. And then the debt ratio should probably remain around 21%, be fluctuating between 21 and 20%. So the unit tariff, essentially 1 unit is 1 residence. That's why for the residents, the rate should probably remain stable for the next 4 years. For the commercial rate, or for organizations which have water meters, institutional, commercial, or industrial, the rate is calculated starting with the unit rate divided by the equivalency factor. And the equivalency factor I don't know how many years I studied the history. It was always 277 metric cubes per year. Riverview says exactly, it uses the same figure, 277 cubic meters. By the end of 2017, 2018, Transaqua wanted to have the 3 municipalities use the same equivalency factor because they realized that when they had a problem, they would invoice commercial 2 different ways, a certain way for Moncton and a different way for Dieppe and Riverview. That created inequalities between the 2 groups of communities. So they established the rate, the equivalency factor at 240 cubic meters. The 277 metric cubes is 760 liters per day, and the other one is 660 liters per day. That's to give you an idea. So Transaqua changed or established their unit tariff, or the equivalency factor, at 240 cubic meters. So when we look at the invoice, the suggestion that the unit tariff, we have commercial, in other words, the places with water meters, to 900. The answer is $3.35 cubic meter. For the next 4 years, as you can see, the unit rate, we want to maintain it relatively the same. The equivalency to go to 240 is going to be reduced by 10 and then by 9 to reach the level of 240 cubic meters. We're going for an increase of 5%. Well, it's 3.6. That's related to the fact that we do reduce the equivalency factor, and another 1.5% approximately for the unit rate. The following years, by maintaining the 940 and by reducing the equivalency factor, those who have water meters should see their invoices increase by 3.2, 3.4%, which is still within reason. As compared to the Riverview, they did this on 2 years because they had fewer commercial, but we do have a good commercial base, so we're going to do this over 4 years to reflect the new equivalency factor that was established by Transaqua. It's actually, this equivalency factor is used to invoice us sewer invoices. So in 2023, you'll see that we'll be staying at 240 equivalency factor by increasing to $956, an impact of 1.7%, which would at that point be felt in residence as well as in commercial. But for the next 4 years, residential should probably remain stable. Commercial will increase slightly every year. Thank you, Mr. Thériault. Question, Mr. Godet. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This graph, does that show exactly that what the business that gives the water, does that show the invoicing for the next 4 years, or are they going to be charging us based on the 2022-2023 amount? If that's not the case, are we basically subsidizing our industry because we're spreading it out over 4 years? Yes, temporarily for the next 3-4 years, invoicing of not water but sewer is indirectly, yes, subsidized, and that's why the stabilization reserve can help. These are not humongous amounts, $30,000-$40,000. Thank you, Monsieur Golette. Any other question? It seems not. So that would conclude our evening. Yeah, I just wanted to know, there was a presentation on the capital budget. This was before knowing what the tax base was, the budget capacity for next year. What I want to know, have there been changes in that presentation since? Because if there's more money for more projects, then if there are changes, I just want to know if there had been changes. No, the answer is no. On the other hand, I mentioned it, it's $900,000 that we're sending more in reserve. So yes, there shall be discussions to choose projects. So there are new developments in capital projects, or I should say opportunities. But we set up a list of approximately 5 elements, and yes, we know that they're priority, but they're no longer in capital budget, so we'll have to do them anyway. So it's basically that type of discussion that we'll be having at the beginning of the year. There won't be any decisions taken before January. So how do we spend these funds, or will it be voted in December? I would rather not see any changes because there's not enough time between the two. But if it is the wish of council, then it can be done. I just wanted to know if we could be made aware of changes. Yeah, it should be presented to council. Yes, it has to come to council. So we agree that on the capital side, this is where the money is going. So in due time, but still being cautious in our expenses, and all the while maintaining a certain proprietary. I don't want council to get excited with additional expenses. No, it's not that. I just want to know if there were changes to what had previously been presented. Thank you. Well, thank you for the presentations for tonight, and particularly, once again, for being very serious and the caution that is being used, including water and sewer, because I can see that our neighbors did increase by $33, whereas we increased by $12. So there's still a difference of more than $120 per household between what we do and what our neighbors do. So obviously we have the advantage, as we like to say, in having a fairly young infrastructure, but still I think that negotiations on the water side are going to be good for us equally for the next 15 years. If we can succeed in finding a solution to the blue algae. If there are no other questions, then we will conclude this way. A good evening to all, and we'll see you next week.